Don't get me wrong, I love America. I love this amazing country. It affords us with a lot of opportunities that you can't find really anywhere else. But if traveling around the world over the last, almost 20 years has taught me anything, it's that we get a lot of stuff wrong when it comes to corporate America and the job scene in general. I mean, these jobs these days, they are literally designed to squeeze every ounce out of you that they possibly can for the smallest monetary loss. That's basically what it's all about. And a lot of that ties into this consumerism society that we've kind of set up, and it's not our fault. It's not the people's fault, really. I guess it kind of is, because we've bought into it. But if you don't know this story, years ago, back in the early 1900s, the Rockefellers, they decided that Americans were just too good at making stuff. And not only were they good at making things, they were really good at making things that didn't break. So what did they do? They said, well, this isn't sustainable because nobody's buying stuff because everything's so freaking well built. So let's make things with an expiration date. Let's make cheaper products, and let's make things that essentially have a shelf life and expire. That way people go out and buy more stuff. That way you're participating in the economy. And that's exactly what they did. And that ushered in society as we know it. Now it's a consumer-based, materialistic society. And I would say even a step further now, we're moving into like a subscription-based renter's society on top of that materialistic society. That has pushed all these companies, especially the large corporations, which I'm going to get into that in a second, but it's pushed all these companies to kind of participate into that idea. So instead of working 5 days a week and 8-hour days, and actually allowing you to have a work-life balance and be able to spend time with your family, now suddenly they have to keep pumping out products. It's all about money. It's all about profit. They have to keep up with consumer demand, and consumer demand has skyrocketed for pretty much everything. So therefore you have to have workers that work around the clock, first, second, third shift, 7 days a week, no time off for your family. Heaven forbid you have to take a sick day. All this stuff is kind of where we're at right now. So I want to tell my story because I spent my almost 20-year-long career working for one of the largest, most powerful, wealthiest corporations in America. And over that almost 20-year period, I was offered a lot of promotions, especially towards the last quarter or so of my career. And I turned down almost every single one of them. And you might be thinking, you're freaking nuts. That's stupid. Why in the world would you do that? That's why I want to tell this piece of my story, because I know there's a lot of people out there that maybe don't get that kind of opportunity. Maybe you're working regular jobs versus the corporate world. And I want to kind of highlight the fact that the corporate world isn't all it's cracked up to be. And the fact that you aren't getting the promotions you want could actually be a blessing in disguise. All right. And I'm not going to trash the companies I worked for because they put me here. I own 2 homes. I'm debt free. I was able to get out of the workforce at the age of 39 using the money I saved from working at these corporations. And I genuinely loved my job. I loved what I did. I loved the people I worked with. So it's not all bad. But the bigger the company, the bigger the corporation, the more that they try to squeeze out of the employees. And that's not to say that's all bad either, because some people love that kind of stuff. And a lot of these big companies and these big corporations, they do offer amazing benefits. I had amazing 401ks that I could have taken part in that I didn't, which was a huge mistake on my part. I was very dumb for not doing that. They also offered very affordable health insurance, dental, vision, a lot of other benefits like discounts for, if you want to join a gym or if you're going to buy stuff. They had discount programs with other companies, all kinds of amazing benefits. But the dark side is that when you work for these large corporations, a lot of times they're the ones that's participating in this materialistic, commoditized society, this consumerism society. And they're very prone to trying to keep up with the demands that's placed on them, trying to appease their shareholders. Therefore, they try to squeeze as much as they possibly can out of the employees. And based off what I've seen, I really do believe that the larger the company, and the larger the corporation, the worse they are about this. Because when you have smaller companies that are kind of family owned and stuff like that, they haven't bought into this corporate mindset yet, and they don't try and strip everything they can from the employee. They don't really look at the employee as a number. They look at them as an actual person. So they're very empathetic to their employees. The people in charge have a soul. They have a heart, and they can relate to the employee because they themselves are still part of the business. But when you have these large corporations that are owned by shareholders and private investment groups, and the CEOs make, millions of dollars a year, they're kind of disconnected from the average employee, because a lot of times the CEOs and stuff that own these companies, they've taken part in that very high level, elite type, atmosphere or that way of living for so long that they've become completely disconnected from the small guy, the little guys that actually make the business run. So they have no concept of what it means to need to be home with your family, or need to take time off, or having a work-life balance and not working, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for 14 hours a day. And that can be a real problem for us, the little guys at the bottom making the company run. And this is what I've experienced. So a lot of this, granted, was my fault because I was a salaried employee and I took my job very seriously. The way I was brought up to value hard work. If you work hard, then you're rewarded for it. And that's exactly how I live my life. So I took my job very seriously, way more seriously than I probably should have. And because of that, I worked my butt off. I worked way more than I should, even though I wasn't getting paid for my extra time because I was salaried. I didn't get overtime 99% of the time. But because I valued my job and I valued my reputation, I would put in way more time and way more effort than what I probably should have. But it was to keep up with the demands of the job, because the field I was in and the things I was doing, it was very demanding. And had I not worked all those extra hours and put in all that extra time and sacrificed parts of my life for this company and for this job, then I would have failed. So because I had this team that I was responsible for, and I had all of these things on my shoulders, I felt like it was my responsibility to put in that work to make sure that we didn't fail. But eventually that led to me burning out because I was working 14, 16-hour days. Sometimes it was much longer than that because I was traveling 50 to 75% of the year. And sometimes my travel days would be 30 some hours straight. That is basically without going to bed. And, I would finally crash after 30, 32 hours traveling overseas or something like that. And I would wake up the next morning and I would hit the ground running. I'd have to be at work. And then I would put in however long it took to get the job that we were doing that day complete. I would go back to the hotel room. I would work even more because I was the leader and I had reports and I had to also do all the other projects and stuff that were going on. So I had all this work to do on the computer. I would work until midnight or sometimes the wee hours of the morning, go to bed and repeat that cycle over and over and over. So I did eventually burn out and I became very depressed about the way my life was going, because when I was home, I would get home and I would have about 2 to 3 hours of my actual time before I had to go to bed, wake up in the morning and do it all over again. Because when I was home, I also had a 2-hour commute to and from work. So that left me with 0 time to myself. And I was so dedicated to the job that I also hardly ever took time off, because I just knew that if I took time off, I was going to get buried in work. And when I showed back up, it was going to be a real struggle trying to get caught up. So for many, many years, that was my life. So I say all that to say that part of this was my fault because I did put in the work. It was on me to do this. But these were also the demands that were placed on me. And it was expected of me to keep up with these demands. And that brings me to my point about the promotions. So as demand picked up and I made a name for myself because I was very good at what I did and I kept up with the workload, there were managers and stuff that started to see that. And they started to offer me promotions. But not only did they offer me promotions, they actually started stacking more things on my plate. So about 4 years before I got out, there was a person that was in charge of an entire sector of this business that ended up quitting because they were overwhelmed. They were overworked. They couldn't keep up with the demand, and they requested for the company to hire more people. The company refused, so they left because they were like, there's no way I'm doing this job. I'm drowning. If you can't hire me more people to help me, I'm leaving. And that's exactly what they did. So what did the company do? They looked to me and they said, hey, we have this job that is now open and we need to hire somebody, but we know it's going to take some time. So we need you to do this job. We need you to run this entire section of the program, plus do the job that you're already doing for no additional pay. And it should only be a couple weeks, just until we hire somebody. All right, that lasted over a year. All right, over a year. I was doing my original job, which I was already buried in work with that. And then they stacked this other job on top of me, which was way more work than what one person could handle. Now, thankfully, I had a team behind me that I was able to delegate some work to. And because of that, I ended up doing a very, very good job running this part of the program while also keeping up with my normal job. And the managers saw this, and what did they do? They offered me a promotion to run another part of the program. Okay, and they also offered me a promotion to fill this role that I had been working in for about a year now, to officially be hired into that role, which would have been a massive career move and a very large bump in pay. So for the role that I was already doing, that they wanted me to now fill, they also wanted me to relocate basically halfway across the country. And I told them absolutely not. There was no way I was moving, because this house here was already paid off at that time. I wasn't going to give up my paid for home to move halfway across the country for this job, because at the end of the day, a job is not that important to me where I would want to pick up and relocate my entire life just because I want this dollar. At some point you have to draw the line, and that's another big point I'm going to get to in a second. So my other stipulation was that they also had to hire me 3 additional people to help me out. And I told them, that's why the original person left, is because she was wanting more people, because this job was too much for one person. I've been doing it because I have a team behind me that's helping me out with other things, but there's no way I'm going to do this permanently without you hiring me 3 additional people. Of course, they refused, so I declined the job. Fast forward a month or so later, I'm still doing this job for no additional pay, by the way, and they offered it to me again and said, okay, you don't have to relocate. You can stay where you're at, work remotely. If we need you down here, then we'll fly you down, but we're still not hiring you additional people. Absolutely not. Refused it. And they ended up putting somebody else in there, which ended up failing because they didn't hire that person additional people. Someone else took that job. They also failed. The next person that they hired, they finally hired them a team of, guess how many people? 3 additional people. And there was actually more people that ended up being brought in to help that person out. But it took them going through several very qualified, very skilled, amazing people and completely refusing to hire them more people, expecting all of this out of these employees, expecting them to run an entire sector of this program with just one person before they finally decided to hire help for these poor people that were taking on this role. But that's what I found to be a very common trend with a lot of these big companies, is they expect that out of their employees. They expect them to take on the work of what 5 or 6 employees should be doing all by themselves. And of course that's going to lead to people getting burnt out. It's going to lead to people that just lose hope in life. They end up working their entire lives away, and that's their life, is just working. And if that's all you're doing in life, if that's something you enjoy, that's okay, but most people actually want to get out and live their lives. They have ambition, they have dreams, they have other things they would like to be doing, but when the company and the job demands that out of you, you're left working your life away. And for this other promotion I mentioned, the one they offered me while I was working this other job with no additional pay, I was actually quite disgusted when they offered me this promotion. And this was another one that would have been a massive career bump. It would have been a big bump in pay. By all intents and purposes, it would have been a really smart move to take this job because it would have advanced my career quite substantially. But when this manager called me up and offered me this role, I was really upset by that, actually, because I had already told them that I was having a really hard time doing what I was doing. I was drowning in work. I already told them that I was declining the other job because I needed 3 extra people. But instead of being empathetic to that and saying, you know what, maybe you need some time off, they instead offered me a promotion to do even more work, to take on even more of the program, even though they knew I was already working 14 to 16 hour days. As a matter of fact, they were telling me that you need to stop working so much. And I ended up having weekly meetings with my manager where they would literally go over my timesheet and say, this is not sustainable. You're going to end up burning out. You can't do this. You need to take time off. You need to walk away from your computer, which I appreciate that. But the fact of the matter is, I told them the reason I couldn't was because I was so engulfed in work. Yet this manager calls me up and says, hey, we want you to run this sector of the program as well. And the worst part about that is that instead of being excited about that, I was disgusted. I was literally disgusted. I didn't even take any time to think this over. I just flat refused on the phone. I flat refused the job, and I said, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm not willing to take this on. This is not the direction I see my life going right now. And the guy that called me, he was absolutely shocked by this. And he tried to talk me out of it. He said, Jacob, I can't believe you're making this decision. You're going to turn this job opportunity down. This is a massive opportunity for you. It's going to be a big increase in pay. This could advance your career. You need to really think about this. But I had already thought about it. I'd already thought about the fact that I was already working too much and that I didn't want anything else on my plate, and that that's not what life was all about. And I was not willing to take on this additional responsibility, because at some point, we as workers, we as people out here trying to make ends meet, we have to draw the line somewhere. There has to be a point where we say enough's enough, because if we continue to let these companies squeeze us for everything that we're worth, to squeeze the life out of us, basically to take away our time and to rob us of being able to actually live our lives in the way that we want to live our lives, then it's going to get to the point where we have no life. We essentially live for money. We live for working. And that's not what life is about. There is so much more to life than working at a job, trying to get more money. And through that experience, those are the conclusions I've come to. So, as bad as that sucked, and as hard as I worked, and as much of my life as I gave up working that career and doing that job, I'm extremely grateful for that, because it's helped form who I am. It's helped reshape the way I think about things. It's allowed me to realize exactly that, is that life is not about working your life away. There are other things in life that are much more important than money. And all that money and all that power and all that career advancement that those opportunities were going to grant me were not worth it to me. At some point, when you give up that much of your life, money just isn't worth it. And you can kind of think about this in terms of health, because you could have all the money in the world. In fact, there are some people out there that are extremely wealthy, and that's all they care about is money. They care about getting more and acquiring more and having all these nice things and get the Lamborghini and the $1 million house and all these things. But the moment their health goes downhill, none of that matters. And the only thing that matters is their health. It's kind of that same principle, because when you sacrifice so much of your life and you give all that up and you don't have free time, you don't have time to do anything outside of work, you can't enjoy the things that you have, even if you do have all the things in the world, then that money all of a sudden becomes a little insignificant. And what starts to matter more is your actual time. And that's the paradigm shift I experienced, is that my time was more important than any amount of money they could put on it. And every single promotion I was offered after that experience and after coming to those realizations, I turned down. Because at that point I decided that no amount of money was worth me sacrificing more of my life for. As a matter of fact, I distinctly remember telling one of my coworkers that they could offer me $500,000 a year to take that one job I was doing that I needed 3 additional people for, and that wouldn't be enough. That there was no way I was going to relocate myself and take that position without having more help under any circumstances. It didn't matter how much money they were willing to pay me, because at that point I was so burnt out, I was so overworked, that my time was the only thing that mattered. And I think that's the point we're getting to in this country, if we have not already reached that point, because all these companies are squeezing the most that they can out of their employees. And even worse is that these companies are telling their employees what they're worth. They're putting a dollar amount on that employee, and no matter how hard they work, and no matter how hard they push themselves and how much of their lives they sacrifice, they're only worth this dollar amount that is assigned to them. No matter what the dollar amount is, I can almost guarantee that it's not enough. Because for the people that have a really good work ethic and they bust their butt and they take their job very seriously, and they do everything they can to make a name for themselves and get promoted and do good by the company, those are the people that are sacrificing more of their life. But for what? for this dollar amount they've been assigned? Are they actually reaping the fruits of their labor? Maybe if they get a promotion, they are, but is that promotion even enough? And is the additional responsibility that they now have worth that dollar amount? And I would say that in a lot of cases, because they're trying to squeeze the most out of you that they possibly can, it's not. And this is especially true if you have a family. We've seen the detrimental impacts that this has had on the family unit. You know, back in the day, the wife could stay home and take care of the kids, but today, both parents have to work in order to keep the lights on. So what does that mean? That means you're paying even more money for childcare while both parents are at work. And that also means that somebody other than the parents are raising the children, which is an absolutely horrible and terrifying thing to think about, considering all of the crazy things going on in the world today. So if you're one of those people out there that has dreamed of getting promoted and taking on this extra responsibility for a little bit more pay, hopefully this just gives you a different perspective and allows you to see that maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be. And maybe you being passed up on promotions or not getting promoted is actually a blessing in disguise, because you really have to think about how much is too much. How much of yourself are you willing to give to the company, to a dream that isn't yours, before you draw the line? So with all that said, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with climbing the corporate ladder and advancing yourself in your career. As a matter of fact, I think that's something we should all be striving to do. We should be striving to improve ourselves and to improve our situation. But at some point, we have to be honest with ourselves also. Because if we're to the point where we're getting burnt out and we're losing our sense of direction and everything seems dark and bleak and hopeless, then we need to step back, analyze our situation, and decide what's more important. At what point do we draw the line and decide that enough's enough? That money isn't everything and our time is more valuable. Our health is more valuable. Because sometimes it's not about needing more. Sometimes it's about needing less. But if you need less, you're going to need less. You're not going to have to work as hard. You're not going to have to put so much pressure on yourself. And in general, what I've found is it makes life a whole lot easier and a lot less stressful. You're essentially lifting all that weight off your shoulders and you're freeing yourself. You're giving yourself permission to not work so doggone hard, to not buy into and be part of this consumerism, materialistic society that we're all now trapped in. Be sure to leave a comment down below and share your story. I want to know, how much of yourself have you been willing to sacrifice for your job, and has it been worth it?